May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I love the opening of today's gospel. It seems that we've caught Jesus right in the middle of an intergenerational spat. And he says, to what will I compare this generation? It seems that there was a bit of a conflict along generational lines. Jesus representing the new school and the Pharisees and the religious leaders, the old school. And they're, of course, quick to tell Jesus, look, young kid, you're not preaching the tradition. And Jesus is like, look, religious leaders, it's a new day. There's an app for stuff like that. Get it together. But the conclusion of the passage is what really strikes me. Of course, Jesus knows that older doesn't necessarily mean wiser, and new doesn't necessarily mean improved. Jesus has a message for all ages. Come to me, all you are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. We all need rest at some point. The prophet Isaiah says that even the youth shall get weary, and the young shall get exhausted. Jesus says every one of us needs rest. That is music to my ears. I've always wanted this type of rest. I'm one of those who loves carrying my burdens and other people's burdens and any ones I could carry until I just wear myself out. So this has always rung true. Jesus promises rest today, just as he promised welcome last week. He promises us that we could set down our burdens and yokes and take up his easy and light ones instead. Now, we know the purpose of the yoke was to harness the power of the animals to do the work required of them, and they are to work together. Church father Justin Martyr in the 2nd century said that Jesus was a carpenter, so he probably knew what it was like to make the yoke. He imagined Jesus making one perfectly for the animals that wouldn't harm them, that would fit right, smooth sanded, where it's smooth, where they could do the job and get it done well. They could be efficient working as a team, a pair. I've always enjoyed that yoke imagery, even though in my youth, I was part of the Word Church, and they love saying, get equally yoked. Find you someone to get married who's from the same class, the same background, and all of that. When really, I read that the yoking is quite different than that. When you're yoking oxen, you find yoke oxen with different experience. You want an older one with a younger one. You want one with a lot of ox experience with one with little or none. So then they could balance each other out. The old experienced ox could say, slow down, it's a long journey. And the younger one would say, speed up, it's a long journey. And they would find their pace, and then they would go together. The younger would pull forth, the older would pull back, and then the young one they would switch. I think that's brilliant. Perhaps something we can learn from. Jesus invites us to take a yoke such as this. Our yoke would be made by someone who understands what it means to bear heavy burdens. Someone who knows each of us by name, knows our gifts, knows our needs, knows our wants, knows our desires. Who does not want us to be weary or weighed down. Jesus offers us a yoke made by his own labor, his own love, and it fits perfectly if we dare to yoke with him. And that's not all. He says, I will partner with you. I will do the heavy lifting. I'll do whatever it needs to help get us to where we need to go. Isn't that wonderful? Rest for those of us who are weighed down by all the injustices, all the discriminations, all the heaviness that seems to continually bombard us. Jesus says, I have rest for you. Find your rest in me. He extends that to everyone. Rest comes from knowing who we're yoked with and thus who we are. St. Augustine said in the 4th century, our hearts are restless until we find rest in God. Augustine also said, I've read them all. I've read Cicero, I've read Plato, I've read Socrates, and none of them says anything like this. Come to me and find rest. The book of Hebrews says we have rest if we dare to believe. Once we have faith, we are allowed to enter the rest. Come to me, all you are weary and heavy laden and carrying heavy burdens. I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I am humble of heart. Isn't that a beautiful invitation? Jesus longs to give us rest from all the troubles and hardships and burdens we carry. All we need to do is give them up, turn over everything to Christ, and he will help us. Sounds beautiful. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Then why is that so hard to do? Maybe you're one of those who are actually, it is easy, and you're able to turn things over to God quickly. Not me. Perhaps you're good at remembering that you're not alone and that Jesus is standing right beside you saying, come to me. I got you. Perhaps you're one of those who know you're at your strongest when you're able to ask God for help. Perhaps your first impulse when struggling with a tough problem or heavy burden is to let go and let God. A lot of people love saying that. If this describes you, praise the Lord. Help us out. If you're like others, it's really hard to turn things over. Even if we know in our heads that we're turning them over to Jesus, who stretched out his arms upon the cross that he might embrace the whole world and take all of our burdens to himself, it's still hard to let go and give it to him. Sometimes we forget, I think, that he's there for us, or trust that he's actually there. Okay, Jesus, you there? You got me? But we don't really think he's talking to us. Oh, our problems are so small compared to other people. I don't want to bother God with this silly stuff. And God says, yes, bother me with it. I got you. Jesus was speaking to all of us. Are you weary? Then that includes you. Do you have burdens, big or small? Then he's talking to you. Perhaps another thing that keeps us from taking Jesus up on his invitation is that we don't want to need help. I know if that was me a few years ago when I had surgery, I had to depend on others. I hated that. It humbled me, and it was the biggest blessing of my life. People, the help was out of the woodwork. We don't want to need help, but we're all in this together. Allow others to help you when you need it and help them. But we want to be strong and capable and think we'll keep our problems to ourselves. Nobody has to know about this. I'm going to do it my way alone. I'm going to struggle through and muscle my way through this anxiety and depression and all this stuff by myself as proof of my own invincibility and strength. For God's sake, we just celebrated Independence Day. Now you're telling me it's Dependence Day to depend on God, depend on others? Yes. As Christians, we make a claim that we are always dependent, and that's a great thing. We depend upon our God. Still too often, we want to handle it ourselves rather than use our real strength, which is that coming from Christ. Too often, we're like that mountain climber. I know you heard the story in the old joke. This mountain climber slipped and fell off of this difficult cliff, but he was able to grab a branch and hung on tightly as he could. And he shouted out, "Hello, hello, is there anyone up there who can help me?" And a voice came from the skies and heaven says, "Yes, I am God, I am all good. I am the God who loves you. Let go and let me help you." The climber thought about it for a minute. "Hello, hello, is there another voice up there?" It's easy to say let go and let God, but sometimes it's quite difficult. But Jesus promised, if we do, he's got us. If we're able to give things up to God and take Jesus' easy yoke and light burden, then we need to be open to the ways the relief will come, the relief that will feel so good, and lay aside our heaviness. If you need healing from despair, if you need help for some struggle, turn it over to God. It's true. God will give you rest. Say yes to the help that can come your way. Say yes to God. Very often that help will come through people who will offer you comfort and direction that you didn't previously see. The help may come in little pieces that fit together in a whole, life-giving, burden-lifting whole. But you gotta say yes. I know we don't like to ask for help. We don't think we're actually deserving of it sometimes. Our need for help sometimes tells us, you're not good enough, you're not human. What? You need help? You're deficient. Jesus says that's the lie of the evil one. God never sees us that way. God knows that we have periods of brokenness. God knows that we're hurting and aching at times and buckling under the heaviness. And God only wants to help. God loves you unconditionally, as weary and broken as we can sometimes be. We all know what it's like to be flawed. We all know periods of brokenness. We know what that feels like. But listen to this. Every one of us is worthy to receive God's love and care because of Jesus Christ. And one of the burdens we can give up is the burden of thinking we need to do it on our own. We need to be perfect. Jesus says, don't fall into that. All you have to do is trust and believe. All you need to do is know what weariness is like. Weariness is the only requirement to receive Christ's rest. As Jesus says in the line of the refrain of one of my favorite hymns, softly and tenderly, come home, ye who are weary. Come home. I have rest for you. I know you're tired. Come home. Having a burden we want to set down is the only requirement for picking up Christ's light burden. Being yoked to something we need to let go of is the only requirement for allowing Christ to give us a new yoke, a light one, a tailor-made with your name on it. As our provost said in her recent greeting, don't carry around anything you're not supposed to be carrying this summer. After all, it's summertime and living should be easy. Come to me, all you that are weary and carrying heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. That's still music in my ears.